A man is tied to the mast of his own ship, and he is begging his crew to kill him, or to free him, or to turn the ship toward the rocks. Anything, so long as it takes him closer to the voices coming across the water. And his crew does not even look up. They cannot hear him. They cannot hear anything. Their captain, before he had himself bound, went down the line and pressed a plug of softened beeswax into every man's ears with his own thumb, so that the only person on that ship who can hear the song is the one person who cannot act on it. That is the image everyone remembers. Odysseus and the Sirens. The hero lashed to the mast, straining against the ropes, sailing past the most dangerous voices in the world. It is one of the most reproduced scenes in all of Greek myth, on ancient pottery, in Renaissance paintings, on the side of a coffee cup you have probably held this week. And almost everything you picture when you hear the word siren is wrong. Not slightly wrong, not softened by time, inverted. The creatures were not what you think they were. The song was not what you think it was. And the thing that made a grown man beg to be untied so he could sail to his own death was not beauty, and it was not desire. Homer tells us precisely what the Sirens were singing. He puts the words in their mouths, and when you actually read them, the whole scene changes into something colder and far more frightening than the version we inherited. A version that says the deadliest thing you can offer a certain kind of man is not a beautiful body. It is an answer. Here is the siren everyone carries around today. She is a mermaid, beautiful, bare, half woman and half fish, draped on a rock in the surf, and she sings wordlessly, seductively, and men who hear her lose their minds with longing and steer their ships onto the rocks to reach her and drown. The danger is desire. The siren is temptation in its most physical form. Sex on a reef, luring sailors to their deaths. That is why we call a certain kind of woman a siren. That is why the word means seductress. That is the creature on the coffee logo, on the movie poster, in the phrase siren song. An irresistible sensual pull towards something that will destroy you. It is a clean, obvious image, and it has been the standard for so long that it feels like it must be ancient. Sex and death, beauty and drowning. It practically explains itself. And that is exactly the problem, because a story that explains itself that easily is usually one that has been sanded down. Every part of that picture, the fish tail, the nakedness, the seduction, the wordless allure, is a later addition. Peel them off one at a time and you are left with something the Greeks would recognize and we would not. The mermaid is medieval. The seduction is a mistranslation of the danger. And the real song, the one Homer actually wrote, is not about the body at all. To hear it, you have to go back to the oldest version, the one that started it, and read what the voices actually say. Book 12 of the Odyssey. Circe, the witch, has warned Odysseus that his route home passes the island of the Sirens, and she tells him plainly that any man who hears them and is not bound will never see his home again. She does not describe them as beautiful. She describes them as fatal, and she tells him how to survive. Wax in the crew's ears, ropes for himself if he insists on listening. And then the ship comes level with the island and the Sirens begin, and Homer, unlike almost everyone who came after him, actually quotes the song. They do not sing about their bodies. They do not sing about love or desire or the sailor's loneliness. They call Odysseus by his name and his titles, glory of the Greeks, and then they make him an offer. Come closer, they say, and listen, because we know. We know everything that happened at Troy, every hardship the Greeks and Trojans suffered on those plains, the whole truth of the war you fought and have spent 10 years trying to leave behind. And more than that, we know everything that happens anywhere on the fertile earth. Come, and you will sail away knowing more than you knew before. That is the song, not we are beautiful. We know, and we will tell you. Sit with why that is the perfect trap for this particular man. Odysseus is not defined by lust. He is defined from the first line of the poem by wanting to know the man of many turns, the man who had to see the Cyclops' cave, who had to hear the song, who cannot leave a mystery alone. The Sirens have read him exactly. They are not offering him a woman. They are offering him the one thing a relentlessly curious man can never get enough of: total knowledge, the truth about his own war, the answer to everything. And Hohmer's grim joke is that it works. The cleverest man in the world hears, "We will tell you the truth," and immediately loses his mind and fights the ropes, because to a mind like his, that is more seductive than any body could ever be. The danger of the Sirens in the original is not sex, it is knowledge. The bait is understanding itself, and the island where they sing is described by Hohmer as heaped with the rotting bodies of the men who could not resist the answer, a meadow ringed with moldering skin and white bone. Beauty was never the point. The point was that they knew things, and you would die to be told. And they did not look anything like the picture in your head, either. Go and look at how the Greeks actually drew them, and the mermaid vanishes completely. In Greek art, on pottery from the 7th century before Christ onward, for hundreds of years with total consistency, the siren is not a fish. She is a bird. A large bird with the head and sometimes the upper torso of a woman, taloned, feathered, winged, often perched on a rock, and very frequently holding a musical instrument, a lyre or a pipe. There is a famous vase in the British Museum, painted around 480 before Christ, that shows the whole scene: Odysseus roped to the mast, his face agonized, and the Sirens as bird women wheeling around the ship. One of them is even shown falling dead from the sky. Bird women, not mermaids. That is the siren the Greeks knew. And it matters because the bird is not a creature of seduction. The Greeks put statues of Sirens on tombs, not as temptresses, but as mourners, as singers for the dead, escorts of the soul. The siren was tied to death and to lament long before she was ever tied to lust. She is closer to a bird of ill omen singing over a grave than to a beautiful woman on a rock. And her music has a specific meaning, because there was another group of singing women in Greek myth, the Muses, the goddesses who grant poets true knowledge and inspiration. The Sirens are the dark twins of the Muses. They sing the same promise: we will grant you knowledge through music. But where the muse gives you a life's work, the siren gives you a shore full of bones. Same gift, opposite outcome. The Sirens are what inspiration looks like when it kills you. The Greeks even told a story about the one time the Sirens lost. When the Argonauts on their own voyage sailed past the same island, they had Orpheus aboard, the greatest musician who ever lived. And as the Sirens began, Orpheus took up his lyre and simply played louder and more beautifully than they could, and drowned out their song with a better one. The only way past the Sirens, other than wax and rope, was to outsing them, which tells you what kind of creatures they really were. You do not outsing a seductress. You outsing a rival musician. The contest was never about desire. It was about music and knowledge and voice. And there was a prophecy attached to them, which is where the story turns strange. The Sirens were fated to live only until the day a ship passed and a man heard their song and survived. That was the condition of their existence. They died the moment someone resisted them. So when Odysseus sailed by, roped and screaming but alive, or when Orpheus outplayed them, depending on which telling you follow, the prophecy came due. The Sirens threw themselves from their rocks into the sea and drowned. The monsters who lured men to drown were themselves undone by a single man who did not. And one of their bodies, the poets say, washed ashore on the coast of Italy, in a bay where a city grew up around her grave and took her name Parthenope, the old name of Naples, a real place you can stand in today, named after a dead siren who lost a singing contest and gave up on living. The creatures were mortal. They could be beaten. And the thing that beat them was not a hero with a sword. It was a man who heard the offer of all the knowledge in the world and sailed on anyway. So where did the mermaid come from? The change happened slowly, and mostly after the Greeks. As the myths passed into the Roman world and then into medieval Europe, the bird woman began to drift. Part of it was language. The word siren survived into the Romance languages and started to attach itself to the sea. To this day, the ordinary word for mermaid in Spanish and French is a version of siren, sirena, siren. Part of it was the medieval bestiary, the illustrated books of beasts, which increasingly drew the siren as a creature of the water, half fish, because sailors and the sea were where you met her. By the time you reach the Renaissance, the wings are gone, the talons are gone, the tail has grown in, and the siren is a mermaid on a rock. Pop culture inherited that version, the medieval one, and never looked back at the bird underneath. But the deeper change is not the fish tail. It is the swap from knowledge to seduction, and it is worth asking why that happened because it is not an accident. A monster whose weapon is total knowledge is a strange, abstract thing to be afraid of. It is hard to paint. It is hard to feel in your body. A monster whose weapon is a beautiful woman promising sex is immediate, concrete, and easy. You understand the danger without being told. So over the centuries, the threat quietly migrated from the harder idea to the easier one, from the mind to the flesh, because the flesh is simpler to draw and simpler to fear. We did not lose the Sirens meaning by accident. We traded it for a version we did not have to think about. Even the wings got a story. Homer never explains why the Sirens have the bodies of birds, he just states it. Centuries later, the poet Ovid gave them a reason, and it is not sinister at all. The Sirens, he wrote, had once been ordinary young women, companions of the goddess Persephone. And when Persephone was seized and dragged down into the underworld, her friends begged the gods for wings so that they could fly out over land and sea and search everywhere for her. The feathers were not a mark of monstrousness. They were a mark of loyalty granted to girls who wanted to go looking for a lost friend. That is the opposite of a temptress. That is grief given wings. None of these later stories is the true one, but laid side by side, they show you a creature being reshaped, generation by generation, into something we found easier to hold. So what did the Sirens actually sing? Not seduction. The mermaid on the rock is a medieval inheritance stitched onto a Greek bird, and the sex was added later still, because desire is a threat we can picture and knowledge is not. Strip all of it back to the oldest telling, and you find something stranger and much harder to shake. The Sirens offered Odysseus the truth, all of it, the whole of the past and the future, the meaning of the war he could not stop reliving. And he heard that offer and lost his mind and fought the ropes until they cut him. Because to the most curious man alive, an answer is deadlier than any body. That is a monster worth being afraid of, in a way the mermaid never quite is. The Sirens are the promise that you could finally know everything, all of it, no more mystery, and the pile of bones on their island is everyone who decided that knowing was worth dying for. Hohmer looked at the human hunger to understand, the very thing that makes Odysseus a hero, and he showed you its cost. The same drive that gets him home is the drive that would have killed him on that shore. The rope is not there to protect him from beauty. It is there to protect him from himself. We turned that into a woman on a rock because it was easier. But the older, colder thing is still sitting inside the story. In the words Hohmer actually wrote, waiting for anyone who slows down enough to read them. The deadliest song ever sung was not "Desire Me." It was, "We know, and we will tell you." There is a small detail the poets left in almost as an afterthought. When the Argonauts sailed past, and Orpheus outsang the Sirens, one man on that ship could not bear it and threw himself into the sea to swim to them anyway, a single sailor who chose the song over the deck. He did not drown. Somebody reached down and pulled him out of the water and carried him away. And who that was, and why a goddess would trouble to save one man from a song, is a story for another night.